Well, thanks for joining for another episode of the Godcast. And many of you will know I have a love of music, and this week is no exception. I'm delighted to say that Paul Farrer joins me on the Godcast. Paul is a not a computer; he's a composer, and he's been responsible for some very familiar backdrops to some of TV's most famous shows. So we'll cover that in a minute. Paul, it's great to get you on. How are you doing?
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I've never done anything like this. This is quite exciting.
Oh, really? Well, gosh, I hope I can live up to the expectation. But so
With me, Alex.
let's talk about music, Paul. So we'll get to this stuff that you've been responsible for some incredibly famous theme tunes and backdrops. But let's go back. I mean, you sent me some info about yourself, and I was really interested to learn that you were a choir boy. And was that your kind of first introduction into the world of music, Paul, or were you already?
Not really. My dad's very musical, and I had a very musical upbringing. I come from a long line of sons of vicars. So my grandfather was a vicar in up in Cumbria, and his father for him. My dad's not a vicar, but he was sort of roped in to play the organ and the piano at his father's church in his tiny little church up in Cumbria. So I had sort of piano lessons from a very young age, and so it was kind of thought that the logical progression would be, because I was sort of immersed in a world of music when I was young, was to go to the Worcester Cathedral Voluntary Choir. So, being very working class, I wasn't allowed in the proper choir because that was only for the private King's School students at the school. But we were the kind of the scrappy underheroes, the underdogs. And as a result, it was just for me, it was like this wonderful sort of grounding in church music. I mean, particularly going through the mass on Sunday we'd sing, and but also concerts as well. So I mean, we'd regularly be in the chorus for big orchestral performances. So I'd be singing with the Liverpool Philharmonic or the CBSO or one of these great things. And of course, the orchestra's there. You got the violins and you got the woodwinds and you got brass at the back. And then of course you got in the bleachers the first lines of the choir. So I'd be 4 feet away from the brass section of the CBSO, which when you're 12 years old is like someone pouring petrol into your head. It's just amazing. I mean, a lot of people have never heard a symphony orchestra in the real life, and yet to be sitting in amongst them when you're that age was just like unbelievable. And my dad also had a very strict policy in the car of, it's Radio 3 or it's silence. So I have a very warped idea of what rock and roll is. To me, Zadok the Priest is hardcore rock and roll, and even now I listen to it. It's as the drop, as young people say, in Bar 24 or whenever the band comes in. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal stuff. So for me, so
Yeah.
church music and orchestral and choral music is just my, that's where I went to school really.
And what was going on in the brain then, Paul? Were you being was it the melodies that were attractive? Was it the lyrics? Were you being spiritually shaped or changed during that period of your
It's a
life?
combination of the atmosphere. I mean, if you're in Worcester Cathedral or any big, church, I mean, it's just obviously the acoustics, the ambience, and obviously a lot of these players and singers are phenomenally talented, and just that moment of being in that space with these incredible pieces of music that, well, sometimes many hundreds of years old, and it having an effect on me. And then, of course, I started going to the movies, and I remember I think it was like 8 or 9 when somebody took me to see E.T., and I remember all this, obviously, John Williams, the genius that he is, these sort of themes that he was sort of weaving and suggesting. And then Elliot takes off on his bike with ET and they fly across the moon. And of course, he just lets rip, and this big V8 engine of everything just happens. And I just remember feeling like I was floating through the air, just thinking, I have no idea what's happening to me. I just absolutely want to be a part of whatever that magic is. And I just love that idea of the combination of music and media in the way that when they're dancing together, obviously you've got visual stuff going on that's giving you a lot of information, but most of the emotional stuff is the music. And if you want to know, watch a horror film with the sound off, it's just patently ridiculous. It doesn't do anything for you. All of that stuff it comes at us from a quite visceral level. I think it's quite deep. It's one of the dark arts music, I feel, insofar as chords and melody and how it works. It's so impactful on us, and I think we invite it into our lives in a way that we don't with anything else. In a way that everyone's got a favorite band or a famous piece of music that they love and that it means something to them, but it kind of gets you at a deeper level than a favorite meal or a favorite painting. I think we accept it perhaps at a slightly deeper level, perhaps spiritual level, maybe. I don't know.
Were there any, or are there any kind of hymns maybe that kind of did that stick in your mind now to this
I
day?
mean, Herbert Parry, I was glad. I mean, singing that, I mean, just I was glad when they said it to me. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And going through the English hymnal, I mean, some of it's a little bit dated and it didn't do much for me. But even the less interesting stuff, we're in a choir and everyone's singing it, four-part harmony. You got this great organ, or sometimes a little sort of ensemble or something playing. I mean, it all is just absolutely spot on. And so everything from that point in my life has always been, "Yeah, it's not as good as that though, is it?" But then I've been spoilt from a young age. If you're sitting 4 feet from the big orchestral bass drum of the Liverpool Philharmonic when you go bang like that, and you literally feel every atom in your body do that. I mean, that's, that no rock and roll band can compare with that for me. So I've always been sort of trying to draw myself towards sort of more orchestral stuff or more kind of slightly more dramatic or kind of old-fashioned type stuff. And in this game, you've got to sort of have a good knowledge of lots of different types of music, of lots of different genres and stuff, because I'll get asked by a TV company to, make it rock and roll or techno or, all sorts of things. So you've got to be aware of those sort of things. But to me, I keep coming back to, all this amazing stuff I used to sing.
Was there any suggestion from the wider family that the priesthood might be a, a direction of travel rather than
Actually, it was. I think it was. I think my mom always thought that maybe I would go into it and it would be a direction of travel. Yeah, I think they probably figured out quite early that I spent every waking hour with little keyboards and cables and microphones and speakers and pulling things in and little early samplers and farting into the speaker and making. I think they'd seen that that was clearly something that I was, not something that I did. And so when it came to kind of career paths and career choices, they just sort of stepped back and let me get on with it. And I was very lucky that I left school when I was 16 and just started working in a professional recording studio. And when I got to the recording studio, I assumed that everyone would know more about music than I did, but they didn't. They were technical people. In other words, they were miking up drum kits, they were, EQing bass drums, they were, doing those sort of things on a big mixing desk, which I thought was amazing. And obviously I wanted to learn that, but none of them knew the difference between a C major chord and a C minor chord. None of them had heard of Tchaikovsky. None of them could work out harmony or any of those sort of stuff. So whenever there was a jingle or somebody needed accompanying on something, they'd give the job to me and I'd sort of put this little backing track together or I'd play the sort of I naturally gravitated towards what we now know as sort of music production, as in you are making music rather than just the technical engineering and all that sort of stuff. And that's sort of seemed to be I've been very lucky that I've just been able to stay on that road for the last 37 years or however long it's been.
yeah, you've just sparked a couple of questions. I'm going to ask this one first of all. As a consumer, quite often we just see the finished article, don't we? Like we talked a moment ago about my love of Depeche Mode, and I just get the final finished, polished version. We just say a bit, Paul, about the importance of the production, and getting the right producer for a portfolio of work. Will you just say a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean the music producing is such an unusual sort of catch-all vague term because there is an argument that the songwriter knows best what they're trying to achieve with the song, and that could be just a vocal and a piano or a guitar and a bass. And I think around the time of the Beatles, the idea of the producer becoming more of a creative influence in that sort of guiding and steering where people are going. And obviously, if you've got the right mix of people and you see, people who have, done this for that band, maybe we can do that for this band. You look at these incredible producers like Nile Rodgers or obviously George Martin or, any of these great people and their relationships that they have with the songwriters. It's sort of more of a shepherding the thing into a finished state, whatever that may be. And obviously within that context, you've got musical arrangers. You've got to sort of wrangle the performers if there's a band, or obviously nowadays so much can be done on a computer on your own. So in a way, we're all sort of music producers because we're all looking at this enormous palette of sounds and synths and various things that we have, and the technology allows us to go to town with endless options of EQ and phase and all those sort of things. So in a way, we've sort of got too many options. It's very easy to be blinded by it. And I look at I mean, I keep coming back to again, my classical upbringing, when you think, I mean, look at an amazing orchestral piece like Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings, which of course is very famously used in Platoon, and I mean, it's an unbelievable piece, and we hear it as a big orchestral emotional roller coaster of just pure emotion that's just, usually in everyone's top 10. And yet it was written as a string quartet, and I was looking at the score the other night, and it is just literally four monophonic instruments, and that's that genius of being able to say so much with so little. We've got these little boxes of wood and they've got a hole in, and you stretch some strings over it and you rub it with a bit of horsehair, and you get four of those doing one note at a time, and then bang, you've got this, for what I can think of no better word than miracle. It's a thing that is just, has been shepherded by the composer, the arranger, to get it into a state that absolutely emotionally connects with anyone that will hear it and will do for, 1,000 years hence. So as a producer, you're always trying to get the best you can in that environment. And again, there's an awful lot of sort of perfectionism, the best microphone, the best expensive mixing desk, the best drums, all this sort of stuff. And yet, actually, if you look at your favorite pieces of music, the music that actually means something to you, it's usually technically all over the place. I mean, if you listen to some George Michael's soloed vocals, they're all over the shop in terms of, this Michael Jackson famously recorded all his vocals in the recording, in the control room with just a cheap microphone there with the music, and they had to try and cancel it out. And it's all over the shop technically, but there's something in it that's just absolutely right. It's got the soul of the artist in that moment. There's just something that's, just pop, it just gets it right. And I suppose the producer's job is to perhaps extract that from the band or the artist or whatever. It's a truly dark art, and most of the time it doesn't work, but sometimes there's a little miracle happens.
And I suppose you can get quite tense as well, particularly if the songwriter's got this piece of music that they go, "This is it," and you and you go,
Oh
"Actually,
yeah.
well, that might be it," but I actually got the.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I've
and
read about
it's all about
ballads
trust.
going, yeah, yeah, I've read about ballads becoming rock songs. That relationship must be quite interesting.
Oh yeah, there's a famous clip on YouTube that's the of the Trogs in the studio. I mean, everyone in the music industry's heard this. This is our, this is our New Testament in terms of how hilarious it is. And it's just basically a bunch of guys from the West Country arguing and shouting and swearing about a track that they're trying to put together. And, this sort of the fact that any art can be made in this crucible of absolute madness. And of course, from the 70s and 80s, all the excesses of rock bands and all the money and the drugs and the stupidity and all those sort of things. And it's all sort of legendary. But ultimately, these are little pieces of art. These are little moments of something. And actually, what's most interesting about this whole process is how surprised most people are about the pieces of music that they do that connect with people. So you often hear about, every band's biggest hit. It has a story of like, oh, but this just came together in half an hour. We were bored on the bus and we put this together, and this, the vocals rubbish. It was the demo, but that's the one that went out. And I have it the same in mind when somebody asks me to do a piece of music. The number of times I'll, invest all my effort into one thing that I've really thought about, and then think, well, okay, but I'll just do Two Ugly Sisters to make that one look really, really good. And they pick one of the Ugly Sisters, and you're kind of like, why? I mean, but it shows you your own thoughts and opinions about the energy that you have of the things you make are very often different to the ones that people receive, and how they see it. So, and obviously, because my job is predominantly music for things, in other words, I'm given a brief. This is the show, this is what it's doing, this is what it needs to do. Very often, my own take on it is kind of almost hands off. You kind of have a sort of, well, this is what I've done, it's the best I thought, what do you think? Because you're used to that idea of them coming back and saying, that's absolute rubbish, what are you doing, that's a million miles away from what we thought. So you're okay with that because you're like, okay, well, these are my ideas. If you don't like them, I've got others.
And as a musician, Paul, somebody who's of a certain vintage as myself, let's say, are you quite a nostalgic musician? This idea of, again, I'm referring to electronic bands who recently seem to like to dip back into the analog world. Um, uh,
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of. I think. I mean, in terms of nostalgia and sort of, I think if you're a musician, you tend to, and I see this with a lot of other composers and musicians, you tend to be able to separate the kind of the work from any of the packaging or even the time that it was made. So, I mean, one of the things that people are often surprised about is the kind of, the naff music that people, well, that's not cool. But you hear something, you think, well, I really hear what they've done there with a song. And you hear some songs that have been written and you think, wow, that's absolutely incredible. Okay, the fact that it was given to a boy band and becomes a cheesy hit, you're able to sort of pull that apart in the same way that often musicians like the kind of things that other people sort of don't quite like. And when, like you say, with analog instruments and stuff, there's yes, there's a lot of great sounds that come from these things, and well, I've got a mini moog behind me and I use it all the time. It's wonderful, but these things are ultimately just tools to get your music to a certain place that you'd like it to go. And whatever tool that could be, whether it's electric guitar or a Moog or a synth or a symphony orchestra, it's about having the taste and all these millions of decisions to get it to where you want to go without it, without losing sight of what it is you're trying to do. And obviously, in the world of production, there's a whole endless stream of nonsense about, this microphone's better than that one, or this is a better bass sound than that one, and this guy's a better violinist or better drummer than that one. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter because you must never lose sight of the actual end product that you're trying to get to. So yeah, it is. I think as a musician, what the good thing about it is, it allows you to be open-minded about new stuff. So, say my 13-year-old introduces me to math rock. And just I have no idea about any of this sort of stuff, but the fact that they can introduce you to stuff and you can listen to it on its merits, and some of it is not very good, and some of it's not doesn't really speak to you, but then it's not supposed to. But there's a lot of stuff that you can say, oh well, have you tried this? So I gave my 13-year-old the Royal Blood album the other week, and he's just blown his mind. I mean, it's like absolutely amazing, and you think, yeah, your old dad's not as uncool as you think he is, So it's the fact that you're able to have a slightly wider perspective on music, and if you're into classical music and church music, obviously your tastes and the pool that you're pulling from is maybe hundreds of years old, and you can listen to some Bach or some Haydn or something and find something in there that's really turns you on, that perhaps other people would just be like, oh, that's old churchy.
Yeah. And what about you are clearly an expert, Paul. What about actually enjoying music? Are you able to whack an album on and go, "Oh, this is just fabulous," or is your brain constantly analyzing what's dropping in where?
It actually is the only type of music. There's three types of music that I can switch off to. One of them is classical music that I love and listen to tons of it. The other one is sort of really soft, breathy acoustic pop, like indie pop. I love all that sort of stuff. And the other one is jazz music. My family absolutely get mad about the fact that I'm just a jazz head, and I that's like a real kind of 50-year-old thing for a man to say. It's about the time you start thinking that whiskey doesn't taste horrible. But yeah, those are the genres that I can actually enjoy and switch off to. But the rest of it, I'm going, oh, I wonder what they did to the bass drum there. I wonder, what's that chord? It's hard to pull it apart, to not pull it apart, because you're always, it's ruined it a bit because you're always peeking behind the curtain.
You got me. I mean, I've not really asked any of the questions I wrote down,
Oh,
but
sorry.
no, I want to ask you this question, and I've asked this of I asked this question of Chris Difford and Vinnie Corlita, who's a drummer, about
Chris is a genius. I mean, what a genius Chris Difford is. What
yeah,
phenomenal.
yeah, really lovely man to chat to as well. But what is it, Paul? When I'm feeling a bit melancholy, for example, I don't go to Sonita or Wham. I go the other way. I listen to the darker side of Depeche Mode or bands like Anthony and the Johnsons or Leonard Cohen. I wonder what you think it is about.
I'm the same. To me, it's about perspective. I'm like, if I'm feeling down, watch Schindler's List, come out at the end of it and think, actually, life's not too bad. I mean, to me, I think anybody that sort of uses a sort of a comfort blanket of, oh, I'll watch I'll watch The Masked Singer and that will cheer me up. I was like, yeah, but The Masked Singer is going to end, and you're not going to feel any happier at the end of it just because you had a spoonful of sugar. So to me, I'm like, no, go bleak. Go as bleak as you like. Read some poetry from the 15th century, or put some dark stuff on and come out at the end of it and think, oh, actually, it's not too. So to me, I'm naturally, I'm like you in that regard. I just think, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, you want to peer into the abyss a bit, have a good look, and then come out and think, actually, I just have a cup of tea and a biscuit. It's probably not that bad.
yeah. Vinnie Colaiuta described it as like as a language of God, a spiritual language. That we don't speak, but we hear, and it has that effect, and it's
Well, of course. I mean, obviously, for the first, it's only for the last 150 years that music has been made not commissioned by the church. So everything that we've done before then, of course, great artworks and architecture and everything, was through the lens of religious or spiritual experience. So it's understandable that there's always a yearning for things like that. And if you look at, Mozart's, Requiem Mass, or these towering achievements, they're all inspired by they all swim in the aquarium of religious faith and religious understanding and spiritual awakening, or all those sort of things. So to me, I'm very comfortable with that, although I am an atheist. To me, that stuff is obviously humans aspiring to be something bigger than themselves, which is, of course, the wonderful thing about being in a choir or in a church congregation or in the later stage at a rock concert. It's still us together, all facing the same way, doing something, and that's a wonderful feeling. Whether you're working as a team or if you're in a band or something, it's just it makes you feel part of something, which is fundamentally something that humans are, very comforted by because we're all pulling in the same direction. The same as any big project, engineering project or manufacturing project or anything, to be part of an army or a team or a choir or a
Mm.
quartet or a duet. It's still you sort of taking part in something that is larger than you, which in itself I think is fundamentally very healthy.
Yeah. I you mentioned clips. I watch it quite a lot actually, is Jules Holland with
Mm.
Ian Audi just at
Yeah,
the piano, and Jules Holland is asking him to create colours,
yeah,
so what would blue sound like and
yeah,
what
yeah,
would yellow sound like? And I find it really, as somebody who's not a musician,
yeah.
I do find it fascinating that we can create moods by a
Sort of a
chord change.
synesthesia, isn't it? It's like, things taste things. I've always thought cooking is actually the best analogy of what we do because people talk about the rules of music. There are no rules of music. These are recipes handed down. Bach figured out the equal temperament on the scale. Mozart figured out how to do ostinato things with strings. And these are just gifts that they've gifted us, saying, if you want
Mm,
to get to here, here's how I figured it out. It's the same way as you want a loaf of bread. This is how I made it. Now, there are regional differences. There are, people how they make bread in the south of Italy is different to how they make it in Finland, and they use different ingredients. Like the music, it comes from what's around you, the instruments that are around you, and that people have different tastes, and there are regional variations, and there are sort of spicy things and this sort of stuff. But ultimately, they are recipes handed down from all of those that have gone before. So, from a musical point of view, like in art, there's really no reason why it shouldn't keep improving
mm,
because so much of the work has already been done. Try and name any piece of music that you can't immediately look at five things that have directly influenced or inspired it. And all of this stuff is being challenged. Occasionally, somebody does something really, really leap pushes it forward in the way that Jimi Hendrix did, or Bach did, or Stockhausen, or any of these other people that they do something that's really kind of over, and people take it. It's not too far out that people can sort of get on with it, and then it becomes into the texture of the landscape of our recipes, if you like. So because I love food and I love cooking, I've always equated what we do to recipes in terms of this, the flavors of things and all that stuff. But yeah, absolutely, can we
yeah,
make it sound red? Can we make it sound pink? I mean, it's it's all
yeah.
valid, I suppose.
And just bringing that into your work, and as we said at the top of the podcast, that you have been responsible for some of the big theme tunes that we see on TV, The Chase, the Weakest Link, Michael McIntyre's Big Show, and we can just go on, can't we? The list is pretty endless, isn't it? What is what's the starting point, Paul? If you could share that with us, do the production company get in touch with you and say we've got this?
Yeah, often they'll call me up if it's people I know, or sometimes they'll call me out the blue. Sometimes I'll hear about things that are being made, and I'll be like, "Oh, I actually quite fancy that. I'd like to have a go at that." Um, and sometimes it's just a call out of the blue. When I did the Red Dwarf film a couple of years ago, that was just a director that I'd worked with on Big Show, and he was working with Doug Naylor, and they needed a composer, and it's all that sort of in the mix of things. But a show like, I mean, for example, Big Show, you mentioned Michael McIntyre's Big Show. So doing that for years, and I'm the musical director. I do the unexpected star thing where they pull someone out and put them on stage, and it's my job to orchestrate and put the backing tracks together and make it work with them. Um, but obviously COVID happened, and then we can't do a theatre show. So Michael went away and came up with an idea for a game show with a big spinning wheel on it, and you put celebrities about 8 feet away from each other, so it's totally COVID friendly. And we made that pre-vaccine, so it was really difficult. And I was working very closely with the engineering department because they were building this enormous thing in a workshop, and they had to have motors, and we had to figure out how heavy everyone was, so when it speeds up and slows down. And all of my work, I remember from that job, was the sound effect of this thing slowing down and speeding up. And there's probably about 40 or 50 other bits of music in it for these various bits and sound design and all that sort of stuff. And then I did a little theme tune. And I forgot all about it because there was quite a long gap between when we finished it and then it going on air. And Reverend Richard Coles messaged me on Facebook and said, "Oh, well, we're singing your theme tune the other day, and I was like, well, "What do you mean you're singing the theme tune?" It was like on the wheel. And he was a contestant on the first episode, or one of the ones they filmed first. And I was like, "Why are the celebrities singing the theme tune?" And then I watched the first episode, and I thought, "Oh my goodness me!" So they're singing my theme tune as they go around. I don't really have any memory of doing the theme tune, and yet it went viral, and everyone was singing it. And I get probably once a week somebody sends me a TikTok clip of some heavy metal version of it, or some three-part harmony choir singing it, and I'm like, to me, I'm like, yeah, but my main energy was the sound effect of this thing speeding up and slowing down. That was good, wasn't it? And everyone's like, no, what are you talking about? It's just like nobody cares because everyone's thinking about this little funky theme
Yeah, yeah.
gone viral, which is great. But that shows you that your own opinion of what you've done is sometimes a million miles away from what people receive and how it works.
Yeah, and who's your best critique, Paul? Are you your own best critique, or do you like to put it out there and,
You don't know. Like I said, you kind of you almost become detached from the work you do because you try lots of different things and you sort of send them out fully with the expectation that they'll come back saying, "Oh, that's rubbish." Why would you think we would like any of that? And sometimes it doesn't happen, and sometimes they like it, and sometimes it goes there. And so the idea of doing, there are some bits that you're really quite proud of. There are some things that you do, little projects that you do. I did the Royal Variety Performance of the 100th anniversary and did a lot of big orchestral music for that. And it was at the Albert Hall and the Queen was there. And you think, well, that's pretty cool. But there are other times when you pour your heart and soul into something and it just never sees the light of day. And I did an arrangement of Hark the Herald Angels Sing yonks ago. And I got a message the other day that was used on The Simpsons. You think, that's really weird. It's just that world of this stuff and like how people receive it. And all you can do is just keep working and trying your best and try and push yourself personally. But ultimately, it's absolutely in the lap of the gods because you never know what's going to catch people's imagination. In terms of whether it's appropriate for that thing, because you're kind of a supporting actor, if you like. You're never the center stage. You're not at the front. You're very much augmenting and
mm,
providing subtext or context for whatever is happening on screen or emotional stuff. You could be saying, oh, we're going to win money in this quiz show, or this something sad's happened, or all those kind of things. So you're sort of like you're behind the scenes, sort of pulling the strings a little bit.
where's the starting point? Is it usually at the keyboard? Is that the
Yeah, or it could be just a
yeah.
little melody that you're humming in the shower, or I mean, to me, I'm a keyboard player, so I'm not really a guitarist. So to me, it starts with rhythm, it starts with pulse. I mean, particularly with a TV show where they'll say, um, this is the show, this is what it is, this is the time of day it's on, these are the people that we're hoping to attract. We want a young audience, or we want a different audience, we want all these sort of things. So already your mind is thinking of a certain type of thing, and it's your job to try and do something that is, as far as theme tunes are concerned, that fits, sort of welcomes you into that world of saying, come and join us, and this is an appropriate sound that's going to reflect what you're about to see, what's about to happen. And so that could be melody, it could be tonally, it could be chords, could be a palette of sounds. What are we thinking? Are we thinking sort of orchestral? Are we thinking modern? Are we thinking guitars? Is it cool? Is it fun? Is it memorable? Is it catchy? What is it? Is it all of those things? And in a way, it's the more they tell you, a lot of so basically most people are musicians because they hate being told what to do and when to do it. This job is entirely being told about what to do and when to do it. And if you don't mind those restrictions, to me, I actually find it quite liberating, because it's like they've already given you the frame, and now you've just got to do something within those limitations, like the Samuel Barber Adagio for strings. It's just four instruments, and yet he's moved the world. So to me, it's kind of like the restrictions are a good thing. Deadlines are your friend, because it just focuses everyone about saying, the worst thing for me would be somebody just say, here's a project, here's some money, write me some music. I'd be like, well, how long? What size? How long is it going to be? What's it going to do? What instrument? Who's listening to it? To me, I need those pointers. And if you don't mind those pointers, and if you're kind of comfortable with people saying, it's going to be slower but faster and pink but yellow and all these sort of contradictory things, part of this job is to sort of tease out what they're actually trying to say. And of course, with music, there's a whole load of you know, language and vocabulary that people have heard. Oh, can it build to a crescendo is the famous one. Of course, the crescendo is the build. So it's like, it doesn't make any sense. But you get good at sort of extrapolating from what somebody's trying to say. Say, what are you trying to achieve here? What are you trying to say with the show? What are you trying to, is there a story? Is there a narrative? What do all those sort of things. So it's actually sort of more like a crossword puzzle in a way, because you're trying to solve this particular engineering problem of, we've got this show at this time, this color. What's it got to do?
And what about a man of your immense experience with a fabulous portfolio of work? Do you sometimes still go down a cul-de-sac and think, "Oh my goodness, where am I going with this?" And kind of over the
Um,
shoulder, or have
yeah,
you got it
they
pretty?
tend to be more tonal, those sort of log jams. They tend to be more either either the production don't know or they haven't been able to articulate to you what it is they're trying to do because a lot of things could be how dark are we going here? How scary is it? Like I don't know, just take a daytime quiz show, anything. It's like we want tension, but not too much tension. We want a sense of jeopardy, but we don't want to scare the old people. It's sort of there's a kind of it's a very much balancing and it's about taste with a lot of these things. And very often they can sort of feedback and say, just rein it back a bit, or they might say, you want to make more of that. So it's nice to be able to have that dialogue of so there's always a solution. And again, a lot of these things can just be little sketches, or you just start
Yeah.
with a note, and the most wonderful pieces of music that you hear are often very, very simple in terms of what's actually going on there. So it's very easy to sort of overcomplicate things when actually a little thing that could just work, or a little melody that sort of connects, or a little bit of grammar, musical grammar is where it needs to be. So yeah, I very rarely get completely stuck. And if I do, it's usually not because I haven't got any ideas. It's usually because I'm trying to second guess what they're after, and they haven't been able to sort of tell it to me. Usually, but I would say that.
And how far do you go? Do you do the whole piece and then send it for kind of
No,
approval,
the whole
or do
thing. I
you?
mean, depends what it is. I mean, to me, one of the great things about modern technology is how remote working has absolutely been brilliant for musicians, for session musicians. So, for example, if I've got a piece of music and I'll temp it up on synthesizers and samples, which are all brilliant now, they're all fantastic. But if you think, well, I want to go that extra mile, I work a lot with an orchestra in Macedonia, of all places. And they're wonderful. So I send them the scores. I've prepared it all, and then we hook up and we have a Zoom, and I can talk to the conductor and I can hear everything, and it streams back to the studio, and that's wonderful. I mean, I did a job recently where a flutist was in London, and the guitarist is in Japan, and they're all people that I know, and it's very easy to just say, well, look, I've got this. Can you do it? Because everyone's got a laptop, everyone's got a really nice microphone, and it's wonderful because it's brought music production back to a cottage industry again, where it's
Mm,
actually could be people who have other jobs, or raising families or something, and they've just got an hour or two spare where they can actually really do something, do work for a really cool project that's a paid job. And I've done with Big Show, it was always crazy. I mean, I remember doing loads of it in a car. I was driving back from I got a house in Spain. I was coming back, and my mate was driving, and I was programming it from the back and emailing parts all over the place, and they were emailing them back to me, and I got the bits while in the Channel Tunnel on the train, and stuck it together and emailed it to the BBC from the back of the car. And it's those kind of things that are obviously, technology makes that wonderful and fun. But for the musicians, it's wonderful because you can key into brass ensembles and singers and all sorts of people, which for me is great because I live in the middle of nowhere. And in the old days, I would have had to have lived in the square mile of
mm,
Soho. That's where all
mm.
the studios were and all the people were. But now it's just like you can be anywhere and still be doing things, which is it's a kind of a real democratization of ability, if you like.
Yeah. Paul, I've really enjoyed talking to you about music. I've just got a couple more questions. One is AI, and there's this kind of debate that seems to be going on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. One of the kids at church just brought me their phone and said, "Look, I've written this, which had really been composed by AI." Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an unknown. We all use AI in our day-to-day lives now. I mean, certainly from a music point of view, some of the AI audio production tools are phenomenal to be able to clean up audio or repair audio or to, extract things that, in ordinarily you couldn't do. Generative AI is a worry because every day it gets better and better. I mean, I think I'm personally a little bit more optimistic than a lot of my peers because I think I have faith in the ability of music to move us, and I think a computer's never been in love. It's never had a hangover. It's never felt spiteful. So how could it possibly make art? How could it do anything that's ever going to connect with a person? I think the thing that turns us on about music when we're in our teenage years, when everything's vivid and brilliant. I don't think anyone's ever going to, have a poster of an AI computer server rack on their wall. And I think there's something about that. And I think to me, that's sort of affirmed, if you like, by the fact that we love concerts so much. You know, the idea of, okay, there's probably tons of millions of tracks on Spotify or whatever created by some Korean in his basement that's just, spitting this slop out. And yeah, okay, great. It's novelty value, I suppose. But I have a greater faith that we will sniff that out. And I think ultimately, would a human ever be bothered to listen to an album that nobody could even be bothered to make? I think we're better than that. So, or maybe I'm completely wrong, and in 10 years we'll all be drinking rainwater out of rusty hubcaps. Who knows?
I hope not. I hope not. But I agree with you. I mean, I love in all my hobbies. There's nothing more I love than going to see a live concert, whether it is just a classical piece or my dad was a jazz pianist and I can't bear jazz. I have to be honest. But sorry,
What's my
forgive me my
pearls?
sins, forgive me my sins, Paul Farron.
Four
Yeah.
Hail Marys for you, Alex.
So what's the future behold, Paul? You've got this great body of work there. What's the aspiration?
I don't know. I
What's
mean,
the
I think one of the exciting bits of this job is you never know what's around the corner. You never know. Something just flops into your lap. And for me, I love the technology is getting really smaller. So I'm in a studio now, but I have, I'm at 80% strength with just what I can put in my backpack. So I like the freedom to be able to travel and go different places and work in strange areas, which I do a lot. Um, in terms of upcoming work, I've always thought anybody picking up the phone and saying, "Could you make some music for me?" is the ultimate privilege. I think the day that I stop feeling that that is a real privilege is the day I'll stop doing it, because I always have that, not too eager to please, but just that sense of being asked to contribute to shows that are enormous. So, for example, Dancing on Ice, we've ran for 15 years or something. I mean, just the size and scale of a show like that. We're at the George Lucas soundstage at Elstree. We got people up in the roofs, just unbelievable amount. It's an army of people all pulling in the same direction. And the fact that you could be asked to contribute to that is a wonderful privilege. It's just the, oh wow, because all of us, any creative person is just riddled with crushing self-doubt. All creative endeavor, in my opinion, is just a kid showing a finger painting to his mommy and hoping to be, yeah, well done, dear, that's nice. It's all that. So any time that you're asked to kind of do that, in return for money or, being part of something is a tremendous privilege. And I always think, well, that's our version of it, because I don't do gigs. I never hear audiences applaud my work. And yeah, the only satisfaction I do is seeing how many millions of people watch that particular show on that particular day, which is obviously very nice, but it doesn't have any real sort of immediate connection other than the fact that you think, oh wow, I was part of that. And if you played the Chase theme tune or something to somebody, they'd probably know what it was. And you think, well, that's lovely that's penetrated. And I went to China a few years ago and I turned on the telly in the hotel, and the first thing I saw was the Chinese version of The Weakest Link with my music. And I just remember thinking, how many billion ears have ever heard this? That in itself is so disconnected and strange. But at the same time, it's like, oh right, I'm not as crap as I usually like to think I am. I suppose that's the best you can get out of it, is just thinking, oh, actually, yeah, no, perhaps I'm not rubbish. So,
Yeah.
and that kind of drives you forward, just thinking any affirmation that I can have that I've done something and people have not laughed at it, that's enough for me.
Yeah, I get that. I'm fortunate to be a published author and to get an occasional email from some random place like Australia or you think, wow, that's
It's amazing, yeah. And
that's just
what's
lovely.
interesting about the kind of comments that I get a lot of emails, and I've put a few of my things on my YouTube channel, is the warm association that people have with it. So a theme tune like The Chase, people always associate it with it being on at a certain time of day. And it was always like, oh, we'd always go to my granddad's at
Mm.
5 o'clock after school for tea and before swimming and whatever. And he would have this on. So I always associate that with a very domestic moment. And that's lovely. So it's actually quite nostalgic. It's most people's take home from these things are, they're warm, they're familiar, they're friendly, they are, a part of a certain time of your life. And obviously, millions of people watch these things. So obviously they're invested in it in a certain way, which is wonderful. I mean, it's just wonderful if anyone ever notices it, let alone takes the trouble, as you say, to just, get in touch and say, hi, I just heard it. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
In my game, there's also another weird subsector of people that are just mega collectors of this stuff, and they always get saying, "Can I have all of the bits of music for that, and all of the stings, and all of the stabs, and all the effects?" And you're kind of like,
That's really interesting. That was somewhere in my CD collection. I've got a theme tune CD, and it's so true. I mean, I don't even watch Coronation Street anymore, but the original Coronation Street theme music just evokes nostalgia for me of a of a boy growing up in Lancashire, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating what the
And again, I think it's like we were saying about music. I think we allow it into us. We allow
yeah.
it to give us space in our collective memory or our soul or
Mm,
experience of all that in a way that you hear a pop song from 30 years ago, it reminds you of that holiday in Spain that you had, or that girl you were in love with, or all those sort of things. That we're very open to music impacting on us at that time.
mm,
And of course, then when you hear it later or when it's repeated, it's kind of like it matters in a way that other things perhaps don't. Which is for me is lovely because to me it's like to be asked to be part of that process that means something to somebody is a
mm.
wonderful privilege. And I think to be creative in any sense that is where somebody receives it. But like I said, there's lots of stuff, tons of stuff I do that never sees the light of day, and there's other stuff that I do quite quickly and don't really care about that goes around the world. And you kind of think, well, what's that about? There's no,
Yeah.
we truly know nothing.
It's a funny old life, isn't it? Eh? It's
Funny old game.
a funny old game, yeah. Well, Paul, thanks ever so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed having a chat with you. I hope people have enjoyed it as well. Do check out the Godcast, and there are literally hundreds of interviews there now, but lots with musicians. So, Paul, thanks for
Am
coming
I
on.
supposed to say click like and subscribe?
Yeah, you
Whatever that
could
is.
do. Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
what
Well,
I'm
you got a
supposed to do?
website, haven't you? You've got a
Push the
website. You've
button.
got a YouTube channel. So check Paul out. Just Google him. You'll find his stuff. I've been taking a look. But for now, Paul, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.